Courtroom erupts when black-skinned janitor defends himself against powerful CEO. He swept their floors for 25 years. They thought he was invisible. But when the CEO tried to frame him, this janitor made the entire courtroom erupt. Before we begin this powerful story, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe to Wealth and Wounds, where the truth of the underdog is told, where pain meets power, and where every struggle leaves a scar that teaches a lesson. The courtroom was silent. On one side sat Richard Alden, a billionaire CEO, polished shoes gleaming, expensive suit pressed to perfection, smirk plastered on his face. He was the kind of man who thought money was power, and that people without it were invisible. And on the other side, a janitor. Not just any janitor, Mr. David Carter. A quiet, humble black man in his 50s, wearing a worn-out shirt, his calloused hands folded nervously on the table. Everyone whispered, "What's he doing here? He doesn't stand a chance. This is going to be quick." The judge banged his gavel. Case number 482. Carter versus Alden. Let's proceed. What the courtroom didn't know was that this janitor was about to turn the tables in a way no one saw coming. David Carter had worked as a janitor for Alden Industries for 25 years. He swept the marble floors, emptied trash cans overflowing with arrogance, and kept the building spotless for people who never even looked at him. To them, he was invisible, just another black janitor, a piece of furniture. But David had one thing money couldn't buy, a memory, and he remembered everything. The lawsuit had started when Alden accused David of stealing company property. A laptop had gone missing, and somehow, despite 300 employees, it was David who got blamed. Security footage was inconclusive. Witnesses couldn't remember. But the CEO was determined to crush him. Because in truth, David had seen something. Something he wasn't supposed to. A late-night meeting. Documents being shredded. A deal signed that wasn't legal. And Alden thought firing David and destroying his reputation would make the problem disappear. But David didn't disappear. He fought back. The first day of court was brutal. Alden's high-priced lawyer strutted across the floor, sneering at David. "Ladies and gentlemen, are we really to believe the words of a janitor, a man who scrubs toilets, over a respected CEO who built one of the largest corporations in America?" The jury chuckled. Even the judge hid a smirk. David sat silently, gripping the table. He had no lawyer. He couldn't afford one. He was representing himself. Everyone thought it was suicide. But when it was his turn to speak, David stood slowly, cleared his throat, and began. "I may not have money. I may not have power. But I have the truth. And that's more than what this man has ever had." The courtroom froze. The tone had shifted. For days, the trial dragged on. Alden's lawyer threw insult after insult. He mocked David's education, his job, even the way he dressed. "Mr. Carter, do you even know how to read a financial statement?" "No, but I know how to read people," David shot back. "And I can read a liar when I see one." The jury laughed this time at the lawyer. But the real turning point came when David pulled something from his worn leather bag. A notebook. The same notebook he carried every day during his janitorial rounds. "I wrote down everything I saw," David said firmly. "Every meeting, every visitor, every file that went missing. You thought I was invisible, Mr. Alden, but I was watching." He flipped the notebook open and read. January 12th, 11:48 p.m. You came into the office after hours with 2 men. You signed papers. You shredded others. And on January 14th, the laptop you claim I stole disappeared. The room went silent. David turned slowly to the jury. "I saw you carry it out yourself." The CEO's face turned red. His lawyer objected, shouting about baseless accusations. But David wasn't done. He pulled out a USB drive. "This is the backup footage from the security system. I fixed those cameras when nobody else cared. I made a copy." Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. The jury's eyes widened. And when the footage played on the screen, the entire courtroom erupted. There in grainy black and white was the billionaire CEO himself, carrying the laptop out of the building. The lawyer stuttered. "This doesn't prove anything." David cut him off, voice steady, eyes blazing. "It proves that you try to frame me for your crime. It proves that money can buy silence, but it can't erase the truth." The gallery broke into applause. Reporters scribbled furiously. The jury whispered among themselves. For the first time, the powerful CEO looked small. When the gavel struck, the judge's voice rang out. Order! Order in this courtroom! But the order had already shifted. The janitor was no longer invisible. He was the man who had exposed the fraud of a billionaire. Justice had found its voice. As the trial wrapped for the day, the CEO leaned close to his lawyer, whispering words that chilled David to the bone. This isn't over. If he wants a war, I'll give him one. David walked out of the courtroom, his notebook still clutched tight. He had won today, but tomorrow? Tomorrow he might be fighting for more than just his job. Tomorrow, he might be fighting for his life. Never underestimate the quiet ones. The world may not see them. The powerful may mock them. But sometimes, the overlooked, the underestimated, and the disrespected are the ones who bring the truth crashing down. Because truth has no uniform. The morning of the second hearing was tense. News cameras swarmed the courthouse. Reporters shouted questions. David, do you feel safe? Mr. Alden, are you stepping down as CEO? Do you regret underestimating a janitor? David walked quietly through the crowd, gripping his notebook. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from knowing that exposing the truth comes with a price. Inside, the CEO looked different. Gone was the smug grin. His eyes were dark, jaw tight, voice low when he leaned toward his lawyer. Destroy him. Whatever it takes. The trial began with a shift. The CEO's team brought in new evidence, new witnesses. Suddenly, David was being painted as a bitter employee, a man seeking revenge, someone who fabricated stories. They even suggested he had tampered with the security footage. The jury looked uneasy. The judge frowned. David felt the tide turning. For the first time, he questioned. Had he stepped into a war he couldn't win? But David had something stronger than their lies. He had patience. When it was his turn to stand, he opened his notebook again. Page after page, he read dates, times, conversations he overheard while scrubbing floors late at night. February 2nd. You told your board members to destroy the union petitions. March 15th. You threatened an employee who refused to lie about profit numbers. Every line made the jury shift in their seats. But then, the CEO's lawyer struck hard. Mr. Carter, he said coldly, do you have anyone who can back up your words? Or is this just the rambling of a bitter janitor who wants a payday? The courtroom went silent. David looked down. His heart pounded. For a moment, it felt like he was drowning. Until a voice rose from the back of the courtroom. I can. All heads turned. A woman in a modest gray dress stood. She was trembling, but her eyes burned with conviction. It was Ms. Rosa Jenkins, a secretary who had worked for Alden for 10 years. I was there the night he took that laptop, she said. I was the one ordered to shred those documents. And I can't stay silent anymore. Gasps filled the room. The judge demanded silence. The CEO's lawyer stammered, his face pale. David looked at Rosa with tears in his eyes. For the first time, he wasn't standing alone. But the CEO wasn't finished. His voice boomed, desperate and venomous. This is a circus. This is nothing but a pathetic attempt to ruin me. Do you people understand who I am? I built this city's economy. I gave thousands of jobs. The jury didn't flinch. One juror leaned forward and whispered, and you destroyed lives too. The CEO's face twisted with rage. The hearing ended with the judge announcing a recess evidence would be reviewed, new testimony filed. But outside the courtroom, things turned darker. As David walked down the steps, a black SUV pulled up. A tinted window rolled down. Mr. Carter, a cold voice said, drop the case or you'll regret it. The SUV sped off before David could respond. His heart raced. He had expected humiliation. He hadn't expected threats. That night, David sat in his small apartment, notebook open on the table. He thought of his late wife, of the nights he had worked 3 shifts just to feed his kids, of how many times people had walked past him without seeing him. And now, the world was watching. He whispered to himself, they're not laughing anymore. But deep inside, he knew if Alden couldn't silence him in the courtroom, he might try outside of it. And the war was just beginning. The next morning, David walked into the courthouse again. But this time, police officers swarmed the entrance. Reporters shouted over one another. Breaking news. Richard Alden, the billionaire CEO, has just been charged with witness tampering. David froze. His eyes darted around. If Alden was desperate enough to threaten witnesses, what else would he do? The judge banged his gavel inside the courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, this trial has just escalated. The crowd buzzed with fear and excitement. David's notebook felt heavier in his hands. He had exposed a lie, but now he was up against a man who had nothing left to lose. The powerful may try to bury the truth. They may use money, intimidation, even fear. But the truth has a way of rising. And sometimes it takes the courage of the overlooked to remind the world that justice doesn't wear a suit, it wears scars. If you believe David's fight is far from over, then stand with him by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing to Wealth and Wounds, because his war for justice has only just begun.